Hey guys, this is Joe from Analog Archive. I'm back with another video. Video today is going to be a little bit different than what I've been doing recently with just kind of recent finds, different trips, things like that. And instead have decided to put together a video kind of deep diving Peter Brotzmann's catalog. If you've watched my channel for the last year, you know that I've really made it a mission to try to pick up as much of Peter Brotzmann's material as I can, either stuff that he was a leader on, which makes up the kind of the majority of his records that I have, but also some of his sideman stuff. There are things that are actually not even included on like Wikipedia when it comes to his discography that I'll talk about in this video, but I thought it would be kind of fun to just put together a video talking about his different recordings and how he progressed throughout the years with different lineups, but still kind of maintaining a very similar sound to it. So we'll get started. I'm not going to talk about every single recording that he has. I do have a good majority, I think. Before putting the video together, I have about 55 Peter Brotzmann recordings. Most of them, probably 45, almost 50 of those are just his recordings that he's kind of the leader and he has kind of a group with it. But then there are also some where he is part of like Globe Unity Orchestra or he's a sideman on some of the stuff. So first one is actually his first official recording, at least from what I've seen. This is Globe Unity, Alex von Schlippenbach. So before it was called Globe Unity Orchestra, it was just called Globe Unity. This is from December 1966. So this was the first one. This came out in 1967. So that was his first official recording. Has a lot of up-and-coming free jazz musicians in Europe. Manfred Schoof is on there. Obviously, Brotzmann's on there. Gerd Dudek. So yeah, there's a lot of great musicians on that. His first actual recording, at least in terms of his own recording, is for Adolph Sax. So this is a trio, his first kind of group. Peter Brotzmann, tenor sax, baritone, sax, Peter Kowald, bass, and then Sven-Åke Johansson is on the drums. Later, Sven-Åke Johansson would also incorporate the accordion into a lot of his recordings, but a lot of his 60s, early 70s stuff was just him on the drums. This is, again, June 1967. So that was his first recording. This is one that was recorded in August of 1967. This is Peter Brotzmann Trio. I actually just got this in the mail about a week and a half ago. The lineup on this one is from, this was a recording in Sweden, but has the same lineup as the first one. So Brotzmann on saxophone, he's just on tenor sax in this one. Peter Kowald bass and Sven-Åke Johansson on the drums. This one I'm not sure is included as part of the Wikipedia thing, but yeah, that was his second recording. Is it just a 10-inch? It didn't come out until the early 2000s on vinyl, so it wasn't, there's no like original pressing of that other than when it first actually came out. So, and then his seminal release, one that most people kind of know, Machine Gun. This is his third recording, really his second LP. This is where he kind of expands to a little bit larger of a lineup, and he has two recordings, this one, and then the next one that I'm going to show, where it's a larger lineup. You still got Sven-Åke Johansson on drums, Peter Kowald bass, but now you've got Willem Brucker is on tenor sax, Fred Van Hove piano, Edvin Parker tenor sax, Bushi Nybergal bass, and Han Benek is on the drums. So it's quite a large lineup. This is an octet. This is the largest lineup that he had at the time, or kind of ever really had, other than when he moved into the Chicago 10-10 in the late 90s. But in terms of original recordings, like an early material, that's the largest it gets. This one, a little bit smaller of a lineup. This is Nipples. The album is split into the two different kind of configurations. The A side features the sextet, And then the B-side is just the quartet, but it's pretty much the same or very similar musicians. Derek Bailey is on guitar on the A side, but everybody else is the same. Evan Parker's on this, Fred Van Hove, Bushy Neibergal, Han Bennick. And then on the B side, you lose Evan Parker and Derek Bailey, and it's just the quartet, Brotzmann, Van Hove, Neibergal, and Bennick. So after he recorded Nipples in 1969. He then moved to a smaller format in around 1970. As you moved into the 70s, Brotzmann started to experiment with different instruments, different kind of reed instruments. Sometimes he would play a very common instrument for him was called the Taragato, which was like this Hungarian woodwind instrument. He also would play sometimes alto sax, baritone sax, sometimes the clarinet, like E-flat clarinet, B-flat clarinet, something like that. That was also his original instrument, was the clarinet, and then he moved into the saxophone after that. But the trio of records that he did were kind of these three. So you started with Elements, this black cover. I've talked about these in more recent videos. You had a trio for a bit, but while the trio kind of worked, you also incorporated Albert Mangelsdorf on a few of the tracks. So it was kind of back and forth between the trio and then also having Albert Mangelsdorf on the trombone. So then you've got Elements. You've got, this one is just, it's called Couscous de la Maresca. And then you've got The End. And all of them very similar design to them, same lineup, pretty much the same instruments as well that the musicians are playing. Again, tenor sax, Brotzmann, Fred Van Hove piano, Albert Mangelsdorf trombone, and then Han Bennick was usually the only one that played a lot of different instruments. He was on percussion, but he also would play these like handmade instruments and a lot of these other just kind of percussion-based instruments. You also have, this is the last one that features Albert Mangelsdorf as part of the trio, and that is Outspan number 1. Outspan number 2, which I don't have, I can't show you that, was the first one that did not include Albert Mangelsdorf as part of it, and it was just the trio, Brotzmann, Van Hove, Bennick. This one's from, if it says on the back, no, this one doesn't have the recording date. If I remember correctly, though, it's probably around 72, 73 at this point. And then you had the final session that featured the trio. Along the way, again, you had Outspan number 2. You also had one that was, it was just Brotzmann, Van Hove, Bennick, self-titled. That's got like a black image of Brotzmann on the front. Haven't found that yet. That's one of the last FMP Brotzmann sessions I'm looking for, but Chacous, this is the last one that features the three of them. This was recorded in September 1975 and probably came out maybe either at the end of 75 or early 76. But this started to, after this, the group started to kind of change, and he stayed mostly with a smaller group trio, maybe a quartet on a handful of sessions, and this really goes even into the 80s. But the group changed musicians, changed also some instruments. Sometimes he had a piano, drums, sometimes he had bass and drums. But along the way into the kind of the early 70s, he also worked with different musicians. So this is one that's called Hot Lotta. This one features Peter Kowald on bass, but other than that, the other two musicians are probably more than likely going to be Swedish, because this is a Swedish release. This is recorded in, this came out in 73, 72, 73, I think it was, 73. The liner notes are, April of 73 is when this was recorded. It's got two tenor sax players, Brotzmann, and then Juhani Aaltonen. Aaltonen, tenor sax, and then he also plays the flute. I already mentioned Peter Quall bass, and then Edward Vasala is on percussion. So he did that while playing with, again, Bennick, Van Hove, also Albert Mangelsdorff. And then as you got to the end of the 70s, there's other sessions that he played. He played with like Misha Mingelberg, and Han Bennick as well with like ICP and Instant Composer Pool. Now a lot of those recordings were from like the late 60s, but those didn't come out until like a lot of them, especially at least the one that featured Brotzmann, didn't come out until like the mid to late 70s. It was like 77, 78. He also played with Misha Mingelberg on 3 Points in a Mountain, which I have. I'm not going to, again, show you every session, but 3 Points in a Mountain. He also played with Harry Miller and Louis Maholo, sessions like Open But Hardly Touched. He also had a few that were in like the early to mid 80s. The one that was, it was like the, something about like the sweeter the meat, the easier a break, something like that, along with one that was called Pika Pika, which also featured actually Albert Mangelsdorff as well. So he did experiment with different, again, not only size groups, but also with the musicians themselves. He was still pretty much front and center on these recordings, but also at the time, kind of one-off, features many musicians that he worked with, but is just this, again, kind of one-off, very obscure one, and this is called Haas and Company. This is a pretty rare session. I can't say how many copies there were, but this is from, this is a Dutch recording, but you've got Han Bennick's brother, Peter Bennick, alto sax, soprano sax, bagpipes. Brotzmann's on this, tenor sax, E-flat clarinet, B-flat clarinet. Han Bennick, E-flat clarinet, B-flat clarinet, bass clarinet, percussion. Johnny Diani is on bass. I think this is the only time that he worked with Brotzmann. And then Louis Maholo is on drums, who, as you got into the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, he worked with Brotzmann on a few sessions. This was recorded in 1976, came out around that time, 76, 77, but is a kind of one-off session, but also features, like, Peter Bennick does not have a lot of sessions, but he worked with Peter Brotzmann and a lot of those other Dutch musicians on ICP, along with Misha Mingelberg, Willem Breuker, guys like that. So that the group kind of started to change over the years. I showed in one of my more recent videos, 1980, Peter Brotzmann and Han Bennick. It was just a duo in Japan called Atsugi Concert. That was another one, again, that was just kind of an in-between. So it was clear that while he was experimenting with the different groups, he saw the opportunity to work with different musicians in Europe, but also recordings in like Japan and even other countries. And just was kind of trying to work with as many people as he can. There's a great documentary that came, or not documentary, there's a great video that came out a few years ago that was part of, it was like the Red Bull Music Academy, where Peter Brotzmann is interviewed in Berlin in front of a lot of like aspiring musicians. And he talks about kind of in the early years, but even in the 70s, his urge, kind of his want to work with many different musicians across Europe, but also to kind of see what other cultures, different countries' approach was to free jazz. So that's evident on a lot of these recordings. You hear that kind of change in the sound, a little bit different in approach, things like that. That's also something I kind of quickly want to mention. A lot of his early recordings, especially albums like Machine Gun, Nipples, Balls, are very intense, very edgy free jazz. But then as you got into the 70s, while it was still very intense, very free, there wasn't as much of that kind of anger that went with the recordings. Again, I think that just kind of says a lot about just his want to experiment, to try different compositions and different sounds with his instruments. And that was also another big thing that he was trying to do, play different instruments. He didn't stick to the same thing on albums. Sometimes he played 4 or 5 different instruments, sometimes he only played 1, but every album was a little bit different, and that's what makes his albums very unique and very interesting. So as you got into kind of the later, mid to late 80s, again, still kind of continuing to change. He had a larger recording with a bunch of different kind of clarinet players that was called Berlin Jungle. He joined with Sonny Chirac, the group called Last Exit, that also featured Ronald Shannon Jackson on drums. There's one recording that actually also had Herbie Hancock on piano, but he played with Sonny Chirac, the great free jazz guitarist, and they did this in between like jazz, rock, free jazz type set of recordings. I think there's 3 or 4 albums that came out as part of the Last Exit. And then as you got into like the later 80s, he had one album with Bill Laswell, who also was part of Last Exit. And then when you got to 1990, he played with his son, Casper Brotzmann. Again, I just talked about this one last home. So this is the one that he did with his son, Casper Brotzmann, just duo, saxophone and guitar. Casper Brotzmann, his son, took more of a like rock, like real like heavy rock type approach to playing the guitar, very like noisy, a lot of distortion to it, and that's what you hear on that one. And Casper Brotzmann Peter Brotzmann plays the bass saxophone, which he did on a few sessions here and there throughout the years. So that was that one. As it changed from LP to a lot of CDs. He had quite a few different recordings. I'm not as familiar with a lot of the stuff that he did in the 90s. I know he played the mid-90s, Die Like a Dog quartet. Musicians changed in that kind of group, and there was a handful of recordings. There's one that actually was just released on LP just this past Friday, the 19th. That was a kind of homage to Albert Ayler. Still waiting for that one to arrive, but that was Die Like a Dog. And then as you got into the late 90s, he put together a large group called Chicago Tentet. The Chicago Tentet, so Stone Water is just one of them. There's a few of them that came out around the early 2000s, like 2000 to 2003. This one's from 1999, from Quebec. But you've got Brotzmann, Mats Gustafsson, Ken Vandermark. Toshinori Kondo is on this one on the trumpet. William Parker, who he plays with quite a bit. I'll talk about that in a minute. Played with him a lot in like the 90s, really through like the mid 2010s. But yeah, he's on this one. Hamid Drake is also someone that he plays with on a handful of recordings. So this is just one of them. Large lineup, again, more of an orchestral. One of my favorite sessions that he had in the early 2000s was this one, still quite popular after all those years. Kind of reunited with Han Bennett, just a duo again. Peter Brotzmann plays a lot of clarinet on this one, but he also plays Teragato, alto, tenor sax, and then Han Bennett is on drums, and then there's a little bit of kind of voice recitation that occurs throughout. This is from February 2004 in Cologne. So a bit of a kind of hiatus between the two of them, but then they came back in the 2000s, and you hear that free jazz sound to it. This one sees him play with this one is Historic Music, Past Tense Future. This is from 2002. but didn't come out until like 2022. This one, trio of him, Brotzmann, just on reeds. Milford Graves is on the drums. And then William Parker plays the bass. So again, some more kind of the early to mid 2000s stuff. But he played with Milford Graves, a great drummer. He also played with this group called Construct, which was this free jazz band that was, I believe, from Turkey. This one is from 2008. The other one was from 2014, and it had like a kind of goldish yellow gold. Actually, it was, yeah, no, it was like a tannish color to the front. But this is one that I just recently picked up. This is the first of the two. 2008, but again, didn't come out until later 2022. But yeah, this is just him incorporating himself into a band. He also did this with a band called Oxbow in like the mid 2010s. So he started to not be as consistent with who he was playing with. Again, he played a lot more. A lot of his sessions came from like live concerts that he did at like festivals, things like that, with just different groups that were there at the same time. Towards the end of his career, late kind of 2010s, there's quite a few sessions, but this one doesn't really illustrate what he did at the end of his career. This is called 50 Years After. This really pretty much kind of picks up where he left off in the in the 70s. So you've got Brotzmann, tenor sax, B-flat, clarinet, Terregato. Alex von Schlippenbach is on piano, and then Han Benek is on the drums. This somewhat reunites the players, especially Schlippenbach and Brotzmann, who, again, at the beginning of the video I talked about, were on Globe Unity together. Han Benek played on the Globe Unity ones, but he wasn't on the first Globe Unity record. But obviously, Brotzmann and him had quite an extensive career. Really throughout the decades, there was some type of session where him and Han Benek kind of played together. This is from 2018. This is on the Trost label, the great Austrian free jazz label that is not only in charge of, or has been in charge of, reissuing a lot of Brotzmann FMP sessions from the 70s, but also putting out kind of archived or music that was just on CD. I don't know what the story is with this one. More than likely, this was probably just a new recording that they had the rights for. So, again, that's 50 years after. His last session that came out, or one of the last sessions that came out before he died, came out at the beginning of this year. That was also on the Trost label. That was called Chicken Shit Bingo. It was a duo. I can't remember who he plays with off the top of my head. I think I actually know. It was Paul Nielsen Love, who he played with sometimes. I can't remember. The name definitely sounded familiar, but I can't remember when they played together. But that was a much different approach to what he had been doing really for the 50 plus years of his career, where it was very intense. This kind of Chicken Shit Bingo was much more melodic, much slower, playing like kind of like these like ballad type tracks. So it's a much different sound to kind of what you normally would hear from Peter Brotzmann. But again, just as the years have gone by, he definitely had some health problems. He had to take time off, especially around COVID time. It was unclear whether or not he was going to play again, just because he had a lot of issues with his lungs. But he did continue to record, especially, again, live concerts up until his death last June. So that's just an overview of some of the sessions. Again, it was not an extensive overview. I just tried to hit on the different periods of Peter Brotzmann. He had, again, other sessions, especially in the 80s. The sessions became a little more sparse, but he played with a lot of different musicians. One that I didn't mention before, Manfred Schuf. He had a session in the late 80s, like 87. He also played with Alfred Harth, who had a few FMP and then also kind of avant-garde free jazz sessions in like the 70s and 80s. So the lineups changed, but his approach to jazz was pretty consistent. He surrounded himself with musicians that offered maybe something different, but he really stuck true to what he was trying to get out of kind of his instruments and what he really was feeling. So an incredible musician, incredible body of work. It's been very exciting to collect his records over the last little over a year. Continue to find more and more of his sessions and discover things that I didn't even know existed. Again, I tried to mention a few of those in this video, but yeah, just a great body of work. And very interesting to kind of go through the different time periods. So if you like this video, please think about liking and subscribing if you've not already. Again, continue to appreciate all of the support. And I will be back soon for my next video. Bye.